Welcome to the SCL podcast, filmed in the MD Acoustics anechoic chamber at their testing facility in beautiful Gilbert, Arizona. In this episode, we are joined by Visar Berisha, an entrepreneur, scientist, and professor at Arizona State University as the Associate Dean of Research Commercialization in the College of Engineering. With experience at Raytheon, the MIT Lincoln Lab, and as co-founder of Aural Analytics, Visar marries innovation, technology, and global collaboration.
Awesome. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your story, where, how did you get to where you're at, and, a little bit about that.
So I got my degrees here at ASU, and there was a class I took. The class was digital signal processing. It was as an undergraduate, and one of the projects we had was a speech analysis project. It was actually a project to go through a series of algorithms for compressing speech, the way that you compress it when you talk to your friend on the phone to send it over more efficiently through the channel. And that project was amazing. I mean, it was, you could sort of, it helped you dissect speech along a bunch of different dimensions that I hadn't considered before. It's of course a biological process, but there's physics involved because there's air flowing through tubes. And then there's signal processing involved because you have to develop new algorithms to analyze it. So I think following that project, I was like, all right, I want to do something related to speech. And so I decided to pursue a PhD in speech acoustics, and specifically in kind of, it wasn't called AI at the time or machine learning, but there's a lot of similarities. We used to call it speech signal processing.
Yeah.
And so I got my PhD there with a faculty member as an advisor here at ASU. And then I worked at the research lab at MIT Lincoln Labs for several years. Then I went to industry. And in industry, I was focused in defense applications. So I shifted a bit more from acoustics to machine learning and applied machine learning. And then eventually this position at ASU became available as a faculty member. And then in 2013, I started there full time as an assistant professor initially, and then throughout the years as a full professor.
That's awesome. Today you are...
So for the last year and a half, I'm Associate Dean for Research Commercialization. So I help faculty think about how to have real world impact with the work that they're doing in their labs. So going beyond kind of publications, which are, the expectations for how you disseminate research to other researchers, to, bridging the gap between a really cool publication and then actually having impact in a real world use case.
So commercialization, awesome. This is like awesome because this hits everything that the podcast is, which is entrepreneurialism and engineering, and it sounds awesome. So we hit the jackpot, I feel like, on this one.
Oh, thanks. This is great.
No pressure, right?
Yeah. What are some of the challenges associated with pulling professors out of the ivory tower and kind of sending them back into the real world?
Yeah, so there's many, right? And I think there's a bit of self-selection that happens. Not everybody wants to pursue this path, and it's not for everybody, but the ones that do, the resources exist, right? So the biggest challenge, I would say, is oftentimes, and I'll talk about this from an engineering perspective, engineers tend to be solutions-oriented and not problem-oriented, right? So identifying problems that people care about to direct the resources that you have towards those problems. I think changing that mindset is probably the most challenging part of this, not just for students, but not just for faculty, but for students as well.
I love
for engineering students.
I think that's hilarious. Engineers are solutions oriented, not problem oriented.
They get excited about solutions, not problems. And actually, I get very excited when you can get a student excited about a particular problem. It doesn't matter how you solve it, but if you know that a problem is important, that's where you should dedicate your resources.
Is that why your eyes kind of lit up when you just saw what we were going on back here? You're like, what is this? What is this? Because you see the approach of how we tackle things. It's not that getting the phone call for a problem. Sometimes that happens, but it's more like identifying certain problems.
Absolutely. I mean, the number of problems in the world is like unbounded.
Yeah.
I mean, things you wouldn't think of, like this pickleball example that you showed me was incredible. Like I hadn't considered kind of the acoustic response of pickleball rackets as a problem, but I can see how it's interesting. So yeah, I think like I've learned over the years that if you identify problems that people care about, you're more likely to have impact than focusing in on the sort of solutions that you've gotten comfortable with over the years.
Interesting. So so for commercialization, like from that, how long has ASU been running this kind of like this program?
So the commercialization has been a focus, I would say, since our current president stepped into his role, President Crow. So he's really had a focus on use-inspired research, and which was sort of like the early stages of getting faculty to think about commercialization and entrepreneurship. Like you want to do research that is inspired by some downstream use case. I'd say in the current version of programs that we have is relatively recent. My position, for example, Associate Dean for Research Commercialization, no one has held it before. So this is kind of a unique position. So within the last year and a half, there have been previous versions of programs, but this current version for about a year and a half.
So use inspired, how would you categorize that?
Use-inspired research. So maybe this goes back to what I was saying earlier about identifying problems of interest rather than solutions that you care about and finding the right nail for your hammer. The way you would characterize it is by identifying some sort of beneficiary downstream. It could be a customer, it could be a policymaker, it could be anybody that has a problem that your research can help address. One of the parts of my career that I would say was formative was this program by the National Science Foundation called Innovation Corps, where they have you go out and talk to 100 different potential customers to identify a fit for your research, like who has a problem, like a really specific, precise problem that your research can address. And so, I'd say that is like the prototypical definition of use-inspired research. You're actually going and talking to downstream people, understanding their pain points without trying to sell them anything.
Sure.
And then seeing if there's some alignment between the research that you're doing and the pain points that they have.
And the NSF doesn't give you this list. You have to
go and cold call and
everybody emails. Just wants to talk to you, right?
Yeah, that's right. Everybody, it's not a problem at all. So you can imagine that for academics, this is a very uncomfortable
this is an engineer's worst nightmare.
Absolutely.
Go talk to not only 100 people, but talk to more so that you can find 100 people that have this problem.
Yeah, it ends up being like a factor of 5 more because you only get,
go talk to 500 people. That's your homework.
Yeah, you can send out 500 emails. Try to call folks, and but it's really nice. I mean, you start understanding how complex problems are. It's one thing when you're writing the introduction to a publication where you can sort of hand wave yourself into getting the other side to think that the problem you're solving is important.
Sure.
It's a whole other thing when you actually have to solve the problem.
Yes.
Well, I can see the benefit here, just from our perspective. We're like, we get a lot of people who come straight from college.
Yeah.
And there's always a learning curve
Sure.
to come into the real world application from strictly research. And I think this kind of bridges that gap a little bit, where you come a little more prepared to enter that real world as opposed to just doing research all the time, right?
Absolutely. I mean, this is, this NSF program that I mentioned is in the context of entrepreneurship, but, there's this whole concept of intrapreneurship where you're inside a company and you want to be entrepreneurial inside the company. It's the same issue. Like this know-how generalizes. You want to understand a particular problem, the ins and outs of it, who has it, and then what are the properties of a technical or maybe non-technical solution that'll help address it. Yeah,
that's pretty interesting. So, it's been about a year and a half. So. Oh, by the way, I wanted to ask this just so for the listeners. Associate Dean, which school? Or how does that, can you give us a little background on that?
So my appointment at ASU is split between 2 schools. So between the College of Engineering and the College of Health Solutions.
Okay.
So within the College of Health Solutions is the Department of Speech and Hearing Sciences. So this is kind of where half of my appointment resides and the other half in the College of Engineering. It's one of these very unique to ASU positions split between two different colleges.
And are they totally opposite ends of the campus? Just kidding. No. No.
Yeah, they're pretty far apart from each other geographically as well. College of Health Solutions is located in downtown Phoenix.
Got it.
And Fulton is in Tempe. But the associate dean position is within the College of Engineering.
Okay.
About 70% of the IP that comes out of ASU comes from the College of Engineering. And so there's just sort of like a higher volume of people that are interested in commercialization in that college.
That is awesome. I just think of like you have all these bright minds in this engineering. You're kind of just like mentoring a lot of these students, and obviously the faculty, and you got all this stuff going on, and it's like probably just like one big think tank. And like every day you're like, okay, my problem is how do we get this to, helping them think about commercialization. Their problem is figuring out a solution, right?
That's right. And so I think it's really more about kind of making them aware of the tools that exist both within ASU and outside of ASU to help them get their product closer to real world impact, their technology closer to real world impact, right? And so in many ways, like I guess the most impactful thing I do in this role is talk to faculty one-on-one. We've designed different programs and so on, but every path to a company is different. I'm sure you guys know. And so helping them identify what's the appropriate path for a given piece of technology for a given problem space.
And you have a unique perspective on this, right? Because we were talking earlier, you yourself are an entrepreneur, right? Can you give us a little bit of backstory about
Sure.
the past company?
Sure. So I mentioned this program from the National Science Foundation, I-Corps. And I had never really considered entrepreneurship as something that I might be interested in. But back in 2014, I sort of accidentally became one. It was through a conversation with the program officer at the National Science Foundation. And he said, hey, what you're working on has real world commercial value. Have you thought about spinning out a company and applying for a small business grant from the government, an SBIR? Small Business Innovation Research. And I said, no. Well, he said, well, it would be competitive, so you should. So that was sort of the first time that someone mentioned that as a possibility, right? And I started thinking more and more about it. As a part of that process, we went through this I-Corps program that I mentioned earlier. And that's how our first company started, Aural Analytics, AURAL. And the company was focused on speech as a biomarker. So identifying different signs of different neurological impairments through analysis of speech. So you may have heard people that have, for example, Parkinson's disease speak. Their speech changes in very specific ways because they're unable to achieve what are called their articulatory targets. They can't move their muscles to the right locations, right, because of the motor impairment associated with Parkinson's disease. So we use acoustics to try to reverse engineer what's happening in the brain. That's what Aural did, and that was the first company.
So Aural, that is super fascinating.
That is amazing.
So you're looking at their speech. So how long were you? I mean, you can talk. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Sure.
The company.
Sure.
What happened there?
Yeah. So we received our first SBIR back in 2015. That was right around the time we did this I-Corps program as well.
Would that be considered a phase one?
That was a phase one.
Okay.
Yeah, a phase one award. Yeah. And it was sort of formative because we're like, who wouldn't want this? We're going to diagnose Parkinson's early. And then you would go and talk to neurologists and they're like, we don't need technology to diagnose Parkinson's. If we think it's Parkinson's, we give them levodopa. And if they get better, it's Parkinson's. If they don't, then it's not Parkinson's. So it's like, why do you need new digital tools? And so we kept getting shot down. We said, well, maybe Alzheimer's disease. And so we talked to neurologists with Alzheimer's and they're like, there's nothing to do if you can diagnose them early. I mean, what is it that we do? There's no interventions that we can provide. So the only thing you would do is make the patients more anxious. And so we don't need new tools. it wasn't until we started talking to pharma companies they were quite interested. And the reason was about 90 to 95% of all clinical trials in neurology fail. So these drugs never make it to market, but they're extremely expensive to run. So if you can identify more precise ways of measuring what's happening in the human body and whether the drugs are effective or not, they were all over this. And so we found a customer. It was a smaller pharma company that was evaluating a drug for Lou Gehrig's disease, for ALS. And we started working with them. We learned a lot in the process, and eventually larger pharma companies became interested in this. And we had a relatively large customer base in terms of the top 10 pharma companies out there. And this became adopted as what's called an endpoint in clinical trials, which is when you go to the FDA and want to make the claim that my drug works, you have to make it relative to some endpoint. Like, it works because it improved this condition that patients care about by this much.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of where we found product market fit.
That is awesome. So they were going down one way, right? And all of a sudden they pivoted, right? You didn't accept failure or no. You kind of were looking to see where it would fit, and you found it. It's kind of like lightning in a bottle, a little bit. How did you feel when that occurred? Because I'm sure rejection didn't feel good.
No, so there's a lot, sort of more to the story. But I'd say like the first 50 customer discovery interviews that we did, it was just either very mild enthusiasm or, a straight up, no, this is uninteresting. Wow. And so once you start getting a positive signal and you see the eyes light up, I mean, that's it feels great. It feels incredible, right? And on a couple of different dimensions. So the first is that you learn about this problem space that at the time I knew nothing about. I didn't realize that this was something that people cared about. But it made a ton of sense. And then the second is that, like, you think you found something where your product can actually make a difference. And so it was extremely exciting.
That is awesome.
I was gonna say, I usually have something to say, but I'm just super interested in what's going on here.
I want to hear, like, at a high level, for all of our speech nerds out there, how does it work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's, you've seen a lot of work with applying AI and machine learning to speech recognition. Okay, right. So the way those technologies work is that you get data on a massive scale, hundreds of thousands of hours of speech and corresponding transcripts, and you train a model to predict the transcript from the speech acoustics. That is not feasible here because you don't have data at that scale for clinical populations. Like, you can't get 100,000 hours of data from patients with Parkinson's disease. So what we did was we started looking at the academic literature. There's a very rich literature that my collaborator, Julie Liss, she's an expert in, where folks in speech neuroscience and clinical speech neuroscience were listening to different patterns in speech associated with different conditions. And they're very precisely documenting that perceptually, so it's just through listening. So we started by effectively automating that. We said, well, what are the cues within the acoustic speech signal that we can measure that will allow us to track how precise someone's articulation is? What are the cues in speech that we can measure that tell us how, this is going into details, but how the velopharyngeal flap in the back of the vocal folds is moving. So we have this little regulator of air that allows air to pass through either the nasal cavity or the oral cavity in the back. And if that's not working, the speech sounds differently, right? So acoustic proxies for all of these things that were, biological in nature.
Wow,
that's amazing.
That is cool. So now you found a customer, and then what happened?
Yeah, so then we started working with these customers, and there was a lot of excitement initially because this was still, when we found the first customer, it was really still what I would call somewhere between academia and a company. We were just starting to operationalize the company. So it was us and a bunch of students who later ended up becoming employees. But when you start engaging with pharma companies, they expect things like ISO certifications, and so there's all of this additional overhead that we needed to wrap our head around. And we realized that in order to do this needs to go professional. We need to do find proper leadership, do a proper fundraise. So we started. We engaged with a mentor who said there's something here, so I'm going to leave my job and run this company full time. Wow. So he took the reins, and then he kind of led our fundraise. So we raised a round back in 2018. That was when we went from a spin out from the university, or half in the university, half in the company, to a formal company, and we got the proper sort of security protocols in place and certifications.
How does that work from an SBIR? So this is awesome, because this is a great story, right? For those that go the SBIR route.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole purpose of it. Is
that's
like, right? You got to write up a plan that says, how do you commercialize this, right? That's like actually one of the questions. So this is kind of like spinning out the way this is like the ultimate, right? Because like a lot of these things don't go anywhere. Sometimes they do, sometimes don't. So was there like a phase 2 there, or did it just stop at phase 1? And you're like, we got enough, we found some backing, and away we go?
No, we ended up getting a phase 2 following that, and then the way things are split up is the National Science Foundation will fund technical development of new ideas, and the National Institutes of Health funds clinical validation, like to validate that your tool actually works. So following a phase 1 and 2 where we developed the core technology behind the company, we now needed validation data to be able to tell our customers that this device works. And so we applied for an NIH SBIR grant in order to do the validation. And this was on top of the investor funds that we had. So those happened in parallel. Yeah.
And then do you have to, like when you're filing, right? Like there's deadlines, correct? Like you can't just file, or is there like you can file anytime, or how does that work?
So you mean by file, you mean to apply for the SBIRs?
To apply, yeah.
Yeah. So there are specific deadlines usually, and they depend on the funding agency. So NSF has different deadlines, NIH has different deadlines.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you got your funding, you have a CEO running this,
yep.
and you're running this 2018, you raised some rounds.
Yep.
Here we are, 2025. So between then and there, I mean, you told me that you've exited, right? So like you got acquired.
That's right. So
which is like the ultimate, I would assume.
Yeah. So it was, this happened in 2024, the acquisition. And we were acquired by a digital health company that was interested in not just speech, but other modalities as well. And so they work with pharma and they work with clinics as well.
Did you add on to your product, like because you had a product market fit, you had your, it's the software, right?
That's
it's
right.
listening. Did you add more to it? How did you improve the product?
Yeah, we expanded to different conditions. So one of the interesting things about speech is that it changes along or because of many different conditions. So I've used Parkinson's disease as an example, but if you think about Alzheimer's disease, one of the telltale signs of cognitive impairment is you lose the ability to find the right word for the right context. And so you end up pausing longer to think of what to say next.
Interesting.
You end up using simpler words. So instead of saying water bottle, for example, you say, give me that thing, because you can't remember the word water bottle. So we expanded the set of measures that were relevant for different conditions.
Wow. And
now we went beyond just motor conditions like ALS or Parkinson's that impact motor abilities, to Alzheimer's disease as an endpoint with pharma, depression, because depression also it causes, or one of the symptoms is something called psychomotor retardation, which is you just generally lose the volition to speak or participate in different activities, which also involves speech. Like your articulators are move less precisely.
Wow.
And all of this you can sort of capture through the acoustic signal.
That's amazing.
It's crazy that you can see some neurological issues through the way that we speak and looking at markers in that. I'm fascinated right now.
So your cell phone could know more about your health than you do.
I mean, essentially.
Yeah. So I think that we have to be kind of a little bit careful, right? Like this is kind of I think the ultimate goal is if you have your cell phone listening to you at all times and it can identify, a particular condition or early signs of a particular condition. So a couple of, things that fall apart when you go to that conclusion. The first is that when we were eliciting speech from these patients, it was very precise speech. We were taxing them in very specific ways. So I'll give you an example. When we had patients with motor impairment, we would ask them to repeat the word buttercup. And you say it as many times and as precisely as you can over, say, 10 seconds. The reason for that is because if you think about the word buttercup, you use your articulators from front to back and then to front again. Buttercup. Yeah. And so you sort of sample the vocal track through this elicitation, right? And because the speech is structured and regular, you're able to measure very precise and repeatable measures.
Yeah.
So that's one reason why just sort of passive listening or just analyzing your phone calls is different. The second is, if you think about our use case, all of the participants within these clinical trials were already diagnosed.
Yeah.
And so we weren't doing diagnosis, we were doing measurement, right? So if you think about this sort of use case where you have some speech analytics running on your phone to evaluate your speech longitudinally, I think what you'd be able to say as an output of that process is like, hey, something is off if you have speech changes that are like unremitting relative to what they were, 3 months ago or 6 months ago. But you wouldn't be able necessarily to pinpoint to exactly which condition is causing them. So we used to call it it's a neurological check engine light. Like it's not precisely telling you what's wrong, but it's giving you some clues that something's off.
Well, it gives you a good direction where to start looking, right?
That's right.
Interesting. I also wanted to talk about your paper about witness sensing modalities. I thought that was really fascinating. We live in an age where you always have to take what you find on the internet with a grain of salt, but even more so now when it's so much easier to fake everything. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, once you get this sort of entrepreneur bug, then it becomes very difficult to let it go. So as I exited the last company, I was actually in a PhD defense. And earlier that morning, I'd heard I'd read this article about this woman in Arizona that was extorted for like $1 million because someone had created a replica of her daughter's voice. Mm. And I
thought you were going to say Brad Pitt. No, I'm just kidding. I heard it. No, but yeah.
Yeah, and so the daughter said something like, "Hey, they've kidnapped me. Give them whatever they ask for, otherwise they're going to kill me." And fortunately, the TLDR is that she was alive and there was nothing wrong. But they you can imagine the mother was very anxious for hours until she was able to get a hold of her real daughter. The fact that you can now replicate someone's voice with just a 30-second clip, you can generate a synthetic identity that it becomes very difficult just through visually or through listening to detect that it's fake, I think is super problematic. Up until like this moment in history, whenever you heard a voice, like you knew where it came from. It came from the moving lips of another human. Like where else could it have come from? And that's no longer the case, which means that like the potential, what they call in cybersecurity, the attack surfaces are like almost infinite now. You can think about different ways of using this. So one of the ways that people have thought about mitigating problems in the space, mitigating the risk associated with these deepfakes, is we're going to use AI now to combat AI. So we're going to build AI-based detectors to detect that something was generated by AI. And this is really a cat and mouse game. I think the performance of these tools, they don't work. And the reason they don't work is that we've effectively, through generative AI, by downloading the whole internet and training these models with them, we've kind of exhausted the information that is in these modalities. It's become very challenging, if not impossible, for AI to detect that something was generated by AI. So then we need a new kind of paradigm for how can we tell somebody that what they're listening came from a person. What they're listening to came from a person. And this is where witness sensing comes in. So we decided that we need fundamentally new modalities, not data captured by microphone, but something that can witness the primary modality, which is the speech being recorded with a microphone, but they can provide verifiable proof that speech came from a person. And so in this witness sensing paper, we co-locate a radar sensor that measures the biomechanical vibrations inside the body as a person is talking. And those vibrations are highly correlated with the actual acoustics of the speech signal. And if they're not correlated, then it didn't come from a person.
Interesting.
And so we use sort of the biological speech production mechanism and sensing that the vibrations and biomechanical movements associated with that through radar to cross-validate the microphone signal to provide verifiable proof that it came from a person.
That's interesting, but can't you fake it?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So why is it that we can fake speech? We can fake speech because there's a strong incentive for people to record themselves and then upload it to YouTube. And by virtue of doing that over so many years, we've created this massive data set. There is no incentive that I can think of for people like uploading their biomechanical vibrations anywhere so that they can be scraped by AI companies. So like when we designed the device for this witness sensor, everything happens at the edge. So no data actually leaves the device. You just get a verification marker that this is a person.
Do you see like a product market fit at like the large places so that they can validate and try to scrub any of the fakes? Is that the...
This is like the $1 million question right now. So we're searching. We're in that customer discovery phase.
Cool.
We're trying to identify. The early indicators are that when you have these high impact live conversations, like for example, you want to tell your banker to transfer $100,000 from this account to that account.
I'm buying a house this week. This is like at the
forefront
of
absolutely.
my mind right now.
Yeah.
Everything's phony, and they're all trying to
absolutely
buy wire transfer.
So for wire transfers, like I heard this thing that I thought was profound. The guy told me, he's like, unless I can touch the other person, I won't transfer. I won't listen to them. So in those sorts of conversations, you actually sort of use the radar to digitally touch somebody,
I see.
so that you know that they're a real live human and they're authorized to make the request that they're making for a transfer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, and I want to touch on this still a little bit more, but I was going to ask, because just to go back for a second, you exited that company.
Yeah.
And you're a professor.
That's right.
Does work-life balance exist for you? I mean, because
question.
the reason I'm asking this is because you have you're in a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
And you're actively in a lot of stuff. And the common question I get is like, hey, Mike, I always get this. It's like, you just run 100 miles an hour. And I'm like, I don't think work-life balance exists if you're trying to tackle the world's problems. What's that experience like for you?
Okay, so I'm going to kind of like dodge the question in a way that I don't consider this stuff work.
Okay.
Because it's a ton of fun. I mean, you're not only solving real world problems, but you get to work with extremely smart people, and it's exciting. I mean, it's really, really exciting. So I almost consider it like just a hobby, something I like doing. So maybe the question is, how do you balance your hobby and your personal life? And that one is like, I think you have to be a little mindful of, you spend time. I have 2 daughters and I'm married. So you spend time with them. You want to make sure that you're present. So you sometimes have to kind of remind yourself, like, stop thinking about whatever you're thinking about. So part of it is that, just kind of reminding yourself in the moment that you need to be present in the moment. The other part of it is I sleep less. So I usually get up at like 4 a.m. So,
You're like,
problem solved.
Yeah, I sleep less. I try to exercise. I try to do what I need to do. And wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and I appreciate that because some folks, they just don't realize what it really takes to be able to handle all of that. They just think, oh, it was luck. Well, no, there's like some of that, but also look at all the effort and the work that you really put into this.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure if it's possible without you liking what you're doing. Like it's because it is a lot of work, right? And it's a lot of effort, and then it's also a lot of persistence because you hear no a lot more often than you hear yes. But like if you have this sort of like unreasonable belief that this is a good idea, then you kind of keep going.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So on the now we can go back to the deepfakes. I just wanted to hit on that because
that's a great question.
I just wanted to know, and like, yeah, I mean,
how many kids do you have, Mike?
I have 2 kids.
I have 2 kids. How many kids do you have, Robert?
2.
Everyone here.
We're all feeling. We're all tired.
Yeah.
Not me anymore.
Oh yeah, he's good.
I sleep full nights.
Sounds amazing.
My kids are teenagers, so.
Well, that's a different kind of tired.
Yeah. So on the deepfake, so that's pretty fascinating stuff. So you're kind of meshing the two. You talk about the meshing of radar and then the acoustic signature.
That's right.
Is there we don't need to know the secret sauce, but obviously there's a correlation that you're looking for. Is it the same profile, same frequencies? What are you looking at there?
So what causes or like what generates the kind of vocal identity that you have is the vibration of the vocal folds right here. So if I was able to take a microphone and put it right next to where your vocal folds are vibrating and just measure that signal, just by listening to that signal, you would know that, yeah, this is Mike because his voice sounds just like this. You wouldn't know necessarily what you're saying because you're not picking up the various articulation patterns that you create by moving your articulators, but you have your vocal identity. If you similarly measure the vibrations here using radar, because it's those vibrations that are causing the sound. Like there's a 1-to-1 mapping between the two. One is causing the other. So there's a very strong correlation between the two. And you cannot generate that acoustic signal it'd be very difficult to generate that acoustic signal any other way.
Yeah.
Like we tried to kind of spoof this using vibrations from a loudspeaker. So you point the radar towards the loudspeaker, but it has a very different profile than vocal folds vibrating.
Yeah.
It's not made of human flesh, which impacts the radar return. There's also, you'd have to really go to a lot of trouble to get those two signals to match up if it's not a person talking.
Interesting.
I was gonna say, I mean, I'm picturing vocal cords and actual like strings and like a plucking of the strings is not going to replicate the same way because it's not human flesh. It's not a bio thing.
That's right.
I'm super intrigued right now, and I'm so glad there's people smarter than me who can think about these things because I never would have, and I'm fascinated.
Well, so and another question, the obvious question for me is like we're talking in English, right?
Right.
But does this go across all?
Yeah, this goes down to biology, right? Like whether you're speaking English or Mandarin or Albanian, my native tongue, we all produce the sounds in the same way. So this is really going to the sound level, so it's invariant to the language.
And when you go back to your previous company and you're talking about like all that research and everything, that is
language specific.
Language specific.
Because when you're talking about the patterns associated with different neurological conditions, they actually intersect with the language in very specific ways. Like if you have a model for measuring precision of articulation in English, the set of sounds in Spanish are different from the set of sounds in English. That's why someone that's a native Spanish speaker has a very particular accent because they're sort of speaking English with the rules of their own language. And so you have to tailor these to specific languages.
Interesting.
Which in some sense was maybe the most challenging part of this. We ended up deploying the tools in I think over 20 languages.
Oh, wow.
But this customization really required a ton of data from each of the languages.
That's a lot
of
work.
It's a
so
ton
it's not
of
just because like you're saying, like if you're data acquisition and everything just for each language.
That's right.
That is a lot of buttercup.
Yeah,
that's a lot of better.
It's actually sort of fun trying to identify the right word in each language. We were going in Google Translate. We're like, what was the word? Pre-Chat GPT. So what's the word that touches on the various positions of the vocal track in each of these languages.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
What
so
is
cool.
the word in Spanish? Do you know off the
Oh man. No, I don't.
Did you do your
remember.
native tongue
That
or
was
no?
it.
No, we never did Albanian. We never
Okay.
did Albanian. No.
No.
Well,
Well,
there
that's
weren't any clinical trials. Yeah.
I just find it super fascinating. The other thing is like if you're leading, so here you are in the U.S., you're leading this research, right? And then you're like, okay, let's look at other languages in other countries. It's almost like at some point you could almost, if you're in Germany, right, or whatever, not that I'm asking like was there cross correlation, but like at some point that there's other universities and other places studying similar
Sure,
things,
yeah.
right? Because this is all biological conditions.
That's right.
It's kind of fascinating when you're like living on the other side of the world, but you know somebody else over there. You don't maybe know who they are, but somebody's hopefully maybe thinking of the same thing. I just find that super fascinating. cool.
There's a ton of work in this space right now happening in Europe. So there's been a lot of funds dedicated to this problem in the last 4 or 5 years. So there's this flagship conference that I go to called Interspeech. And when we were presenting our work there was maybe 3 or 4 out of thousands of papers in this particular area. And now I think it's like 10% to 15% of the conference. So it's really grown as a field considerably.
One thing I'll mention I thought was interesting is so we have an office in Simi Valley, California, which is Los Angeles. Yeah. The Ronald Reagan Library is there.
Yeah.
And I took my kids to the Ronald Reagan Library maybe a month or two ago. And you walk in and there's a hologram of Ronald Reagan, and he's talking to you as if you're really right there in front of him, right? And they obviously did the AI speech, and they tout it. They're
That's
like,
right.
hey, we took this whole thing, and I mean, it's just fascinating, right? It's not really him. It's not even his voice, but they mimic his voice and everything. And it feels like he's really there in front of you talking to you. So, I mean, this is just fascinating to like the stuff you're hitting on. And obviously the extreme is like, hey, give me $1 million or I'm going to, all these fake things or wire your money to this for your house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's crazy.
Yeah. There are some, pretty reasonable, good, well-meaning use cases for this technology. I mean, one that kind of relates back to what I was saying earlier about neurological impairment is this condition, Lou Gehrig's disease. So a particular variant of this condition, people lose the ability to speak in about 6 months. So what they do is they voice bank. So you record because you know that 6 months later you won't be able to speak. And so now there are companies out there that will generate a vocal identity so that once you lose the ability to speak, the augmentative communication devices that you use sound just like you used to.
Wow.
So you no longer have to sound like Stephen Hawking.
That's right. Yeah.
That's wild.
That is fascinating. That's a great use case there.
Yeah.
And see, and I can think of how cool that would have been. My dad actually passed away of a stroke, and he got to a point where he couldn't speak, and it would have been nice to be able to actually have that, where there was just nothing.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
We spent a good portion of time where, there just was no communication. It was impossible. So that's really cool.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Well, is there anything else? Oh, so let's before we wrap up here, what would you tell yourself, would you do anything different? I mean, it sounds like you've had a phenomenal journey. What would you tell your younger self?
Yeah, what would I tell my? This is a good question.
Going through all the challenges and the highs, lows.
I think, like professionally speaking, is to enjoy the journey, because in the moment you're not you're kind of thinking about outcomes and not the journey. Yeah, the journey is incredible. Like thinking back, the people I got to work with, the cool science that we discovered together, the cool technology that we built, that whole process is probably kind of like my favorite part of my profession. So I think it's like enjoy the journey in the moment.
It's a good reminder.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
What's the future? So is the future of this stuff obviously detecting deep fakes? Do you think that there's anything else in speech? Because like when I think of speech, we took a speech class I did when I was in school, and most people think of speech pathology typically, right? And you just totally flipped on its head. I mean, this is totally machine. Like you talk about machine learning, and
that's right.
It's awesome. Is there this is opening up, right? Is this a new avenue?
Yeah, I think there are, there have been these sorts of things that we maybe considered sci-fi before. One is these silent speech interfaces. It's really sort of fascinating. So people for a long time have been trying to detect the brain using EEG, the brain waves, and then convert that to speech. Turns out that's really challenging. But what is closer to being feasible, especially with large language models and generative AI, is measuring muscle movements as you think about speech, these micro movements, and converting those to speech. So we could be holding this podcast without us actually generating sound, but just thinking about what we want to say. Those thoughts activate the muscles associated with speech in very
Telepathy.
Yeah, and you can have telepathy. Yeah.
That's basically what
That's
it is.
amazing.
Maybe one day. I mean,
I'm
we could be 100 years from that, right? I mean, who knows? Like,
I saw there was some company out of MIT Media Labs that said that this is quite close. Actually, I think that they released at least some demo or something. So
since you were at Lincoln and we haven't had anybody there, is it as good as everybody says it is? Is this? I mean,
it's fantastic. I mean, so that was before I had to think about how to fund my lab at ASU, constantly writing grants. So you literally are in an office with another smart person, and all you do is think all day and write papers and have really interesting conversations without having to worry about like making sure all your graduate students are funded. And so in terms of fun, it was a ton of fun.
That's awesome. Well, we appreciate you coming on our show today, and phenomenal. Do you have any websites, anything else you want to plug, anything?
If you do a search for my name, Visar Berisha, you'll find all of the information that I talked about today, the papers, my website, and so on.
And Visar, we didn't bring your name up before. We do a whole plug on you, so
okay.
we have all this stuff, and for sure, we didn't call you doctor or professor, but we really appreciate your time here. This is awesome.
No, thank you guys for the invite. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Amazing.